The sun hadn't cleared the skyline when he stepped off the curb, shoulders hunched slightly against the morning wind. The street glistened with yesterday's rain, and the city moved like a machine warming up, slow, steady, indifferent. He walked alone, hands tucked into a coat that had seen too many winters. It wasn't ragged, just worn. The kind of garment that carried history more than fashion. His shoes were sturdy but quiet, leather dulled by distance rather than design. He moved with the confidence of someone who didn't need to be watched and knew exactly what happened when he was. Ahead, the bank branch stood tall, glass polished to a high shine, marble just inside the doors reflecting the kind of wealth that made people straighten their backs before entering. The logo glinted above the frame, crisp, established, carefully curated to say power without needing to shout. He didn't pause before entering. The space inside was curated for performance. Sleek counters. Uniformed staff. Strategically placed chairs designed less for comfort and more for compliance. Screens flashed promotional language, wealth is confidence. Invest in your legacy. Let us guide you forward. But wealth didn't sit in the air here, it hovered like judgment. He joined the line. There were 6 ahead of him, 2 in tailored coats, one cradling an expensive handbag like it was an heirloom, the others with smartwatches and carefully styled hair. They barely noticed him. He didn't fit the choreography. No glossy leather case. No designer label. He waited without fidgeting. Eventually, he stepped forward. The teller was young, sharp, eyes moving too quickly across his face before dropping to the check he handed her. It was printed clearly. Clean. The amount was substantial but not outlandish. Still, she hesitated. Brows drew together. Fingers paused above the keyboard. She looked up, tried to smile, the trained kind. Then came the deflection. I'll need to get someone. She didn't wait for an answer. Slipped away, heels clicking. From the side, a man in a navy suit stepped over. Mid-level. Confident. The kind of person who measured worth in cufflinks and conversation volume. He glanced at the check. Then at the man. Then smirked. You sure you're in the right place? He said, voice just low enough for plausible deniability. We see a lot of this confusion. He tapped the counter twice. Stop pretending to be rich. You'll save everyone time. A chuckle from the customer at the next window. The kind that begged to be part of something. The man didn't blink. He didn't reach for his wallet. Or argue. He reached into his coat. And pulled out a worn leather badge. Thin. Matte. Unimpressive at first glance. Until the light caught the emblem. The seal of the institution. Embedded. Below it, an identification number not of an account holder but of a primary stakeholder. The man laid it on the counter. Calmly. Deliberately. The teller returned in time to see the associate pale. Then stiffen. Then take a full step back. The badge was real. Not the plastic ones handed out at conferences. Not a laminated guest pass. A shareholder's credential reserved for the few who didn't just use the bank but shaped it. He didn't smile. He didn't explain. He just waited. The branch manager came next, moving faster than her shoes allowed. She greeted him with a mixture of forced professionalism and untrained panic. She addressed him by name, the name they hadn't cared to ask until it appeared beside the institution's equity registry. A new account manager was summoned. The check was processed immediately. Apologies were offered, not as words, but in silence, in posture, in avoidance. He didn't chastise. He didn't correct. He signed the receipt, took the confirmation, and left through the same glass door he'd entered, the one now held open by a man who couldn't meet his eyes. Outside, the city hadn't changed. But inside the building, everything had. The office lights flickered to life as the sun crept higher across the skyline. Across the bank's upper floors, the ones where names mattered and voices echoed, the day began with whispered tension. His name was in the system now, but no one quite knew what to do with it. In a place built on hierarchy, he had entered outside the script. No title. No meeting. No notice. Just a signature on documents older than some of the people who tried to refuse him service. Word spread. Not officially. Quietly. Through the way assistants asked follow-up questions they never used to. Through the way mid-level associates double-checked numbers before speaking. Through the subtle shift in how the receptionist smiled at everyone who walked through the door just in case. He didn't return the next day. But he didn't have to. Because once the illusion broke, the memory stayed. A few people searched his name online only to find sparse mentions, boardroom minutes, a decades-old interview behind a paywall, a grainy photo from a charity gala where he stood off to the side while others held the check. Nothing flashy. Nothing promotional. But real. Old partners remembered him. The first funders of the bank back when it wasn't a skyscraper but a 3-room suite near a commuter line. Back when lending decisions were made over coffee, not spreadsheets. He had been there in those early meetings. Not speaking often, but listening always. He didn't chase recognition. He built structure. He didn't command the room. He rewired its foundation. And when the board changed, when the names grew shinier, when the direction shifted from service to show, he stepped back. Not out of resentment. Out of principle. He never left ownership. He just stopped performing it. Meanwhile, back on the lobby floor, the associate who had made the mistake adjusted. He stayed quiet, took shorter breaks, looked people in the eye a little longer before making assumptions. He wasn't punished, but he had learned. The lesson didn't arrive in shouting. It arrived in silence that couldn't be erased. Elsewhere, behind closed doors, a compliance director flagged a memo, revise front-of-house protocol. Another flagged language in training materials, avoid behavior implying customer status based on attire. Small changes, but meaningful ones, not out of guilt, but clarity. At the end of the week, the shareholder returned. Unannounced. He didn't enter through the lobby. He took the side entrance. The one next to the delivery dock. The one no one ever cleaned as often as they promised. He moved through corridors like he knew them because he did. He passed a wall of portraits, most of them unfamiliar. His photo wasn't there. It never had been. He'd refused it during the institution's first decade. Let the building speak, he'd said. But now the building had forgotten his voice. He entered a staff meeting. Sat at the back. No introduction. Just listened. Young analysts debated credit policies, risk thresholds, automation. They spoke confidently, passionately even, but their words revealed a gap. A lack of memory. Of context. Of what it meant to lend not just money but belief. He didn't interrupt. Until the last slide. Then calmly he stood. The room froze, uncertain who he was, uncertain what to say. He walked to the front. Not with authority. With history. And he erased the final bullet point. Then rewrote it. One sentence. Protect the customer no one's looking at. Then he left. Without a handshake. Without a photo. Without saying his name. The winter wind sharpened, carving through the avenues like a scalpel as the city shifted into a slower rhythm. Heavy coats replaced tailored blazers. Scarves wrapped around heads bent toward their phones. And inside the bank's headquarters, the tone of conversation had changed. Not in words. In pace. He returned quietly, more often now. Not as a shadow, not as an overseer, but as something else the staff couldn't categorize. He didn't sit in the executive wing. He didn't schedule boardroom appearances. He moved among the ignored spaces, the loading bays, the forgotten archive rooms, the corners of the break rooms where interns waited for their contracts to expire. He listened. Not for gossip, for truth. And what he heard confirmed what he already knew, somewhere between the marketing campaigns and the quarterly celebrations. The soul of the bank had been sold off, not in one dramatic moment, but piece by piece. The culture had calcified. What once was service had become spectacle. He didn't correct anyone. He built counterweights. Small actions. He found a janitor working double shifts to cover his daughter's therapy bills. The man never asked for help, never missed a day. One evening, without introduction, the shareholder handed him a sealed envelope. Inside, a revised compensation letter, retroactive. No press release. Just respect. He noticed a young analyst, overlooked, overused, presenting original models under someone else's name. The next week, a promotion memo circulated. No explanation. Just her name on the door. When asked how it happened, she only said, "Someone saw me." He walked the corridors with no entourage, but eyes followed him now. Not out of curiosity, out of awareness. The kind of awareness that made people check themselves. Not to impress, but to avoid pretending. Because the man who once stood in line like a stranger now hovered behind the glass they had once seen through him. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the other shareholders grew curious. They started noticing subtle changes, investments redirected, meetings shifted, initiatives paused without warning. The language changed on internal documents, client first, replaced, growth max. Templates rewritten. Partnerships quietly dissolved. No announcement came, but the weight of his presence pressed against the system like gravity. One evening he stood outside the branch where it began. The same one where they told him to stop pretending. The windows reflected 1,000 transactions per day, but none of them showed what he came to see. He stepped inside. No line this time. The staff recognized him now. They stood taller. Straighter. He nodded, not asking for anything. At the far end of the floor, a training session played on a small monitor for new hires. The instructor spoke about procedure, process, policy. The screen showed charts, diagrams, theoretical customers. He watched for a moment, then walked forward. He took the marker from the table. No one stopped him. He drew a single box, then another, and inside it he wrote the phrase he hadn't heard in that training. Wealth is not appearance. It is stability. Then he left. No lecture. No scolding. Only the memory of his hand writing what the institution had forgotten. Outside, snow had begun to fall. The flakes caught on his coat, melted slowly into the fabric as he walked back through the side streets, away from the tower that still bore his investment, away from the brand that had learned how to market compassion but not practice it. He was rebuilding it now. From the inside out. Spring crept back into the city without ceremony, soft air replacing frost, sunlight slipping between towers at new angles. Life quickened, but inside the bank's headquarters, the rhythm was no longer the same. The old scripts had begun to dissolve. People lowered their voices when they spoke assumptions. No one said, "You don't look like a client" anymore, not because they'd been warned, but because they'd been watched. His presence lingered like a watermark, invisible until you held the moment up to light. He kept arriving, irregularly but precisely. Sometimes early morning. Sometimes late evening. Sometimes in a crowd, sometimes alone. No driver. No press. No badge. But wherever he walked, hierarchy rewrote itself. A new hire once asked where his office was. The answer, he doesn't need one. He carried no briefcase, no tablet, no clamshell laptop. What he carried was memory. And people began to feel it, the weight of being seen not as part of a pipeline, but as part of a story. In a strategy meeting upstairs, someone proposed an initiative, premium clients only. A tiered system. Invitations. Events. Segmentation by spending. Before the room could vote, the door opened. He entered without knocking. He sat down. He listened. And when the final slide came, he reached over and erased the word premium. He wrote one word in its place. People. No further comment. They didn't proceed with the rollout. Across the city, branches began to change. Not through glossy renovations, but through presence. Staff started greeting the customers they once ignored. The older woman in the coat, 3 years out of season, now received full attention. The man with the recycled shopping bag was offered a financial wellness review. Not because they complained. Because someone reminded the system how it was supposed to work. Once, a teller found a card left behind at a desk, a single black rectangle with gold trim, no numbers, just a name and 3 words printed in small font. Never assume status. She kept it in her drawer. Later, that same teller became a branch lead. She never said how, but she started holding monthly listening sessions with the staff. Not because she was told to, because someone had shown her what leadership looked like when it was invisible. Meanwhile, he returned to the boardroom once, just once. The shareholders had questions. About direction. About messaging. About why the metrics had shifted from aggressive growth to retention and depth. He stood at the window. Looked out over the skyline. Said nothing for a long time. Then turned. And pointed to the mission statement engraved on the wall. Build trust. Then he asked one question. When did that become a slogan instead of a standard? Silence. That was the only meeting he attended that quarter. He never had to return. The headlines caught up slowly. First, a blog post, anonymous, reflective, curious. The man at the counter who owns the vault. It told the story of a shareholder no one recognized, dressed in silence and humility, walking through the bank like he was auditing not the numbers but the humanity. Then came a podcast. Then a panel discussion. Then speculation. They tried to name him, but most got it wrong. Because he never gave interviews. Never posed for photos. Never corrected anyone. He didn't build a personal brand. He built something that lasted. Inside the bank, the shift became visible. The front desks began to reflect the communities they served. Branch leaders came not just from resumes, but from lived experience. A young man from the East Side, once declined for a teller role because of a visible neck tattoo, now led staff meetings after outperforming 5 quarters in a row. The dress code changed. Not by policy. By example. No one wanted to mistake effort for attire again. He watched from the margins. Still no corner office. Still no parking space. Still no mention on the website's leadership page. But things were working. Because what he wanted was never credit, it was course correction. The kind that can't be bought. One afternoon, he visited a rural branch 3 hours outside the city, a place where the only ATM had a cracked screen and the carpet had stains older than some of the interns. No media followed. No managers warned. He just walked in and sat down. The staff didn't recognize him, but they served him with kindness. He noticed, and returned the next week with a repair crew and a fresh budget. Not a donation. An update. He met the local manager at the side exit, handed her a folder. Inside, a memo titled "Why This Branch Matters." She read it 3 times that night. It wasn't full of statistics. It was full of stories. 2 weeks later, she rewrote her training materials to include a section on dignity. Back at headquarters, someone from marketing proposed a campaign. They wanted to turn the story into content. A visual series. A modern fable, they called it. He declined. Quietly. Firmly. Because the moment the truth becomes a slogan, it loses its teeth. But he didn't stop the story. He let it spread the way all truth should, person to person, through changed behavior and earned reverence. The associate who once mocked him had become quieter. Not ashamed. Transformed. He spent more time listening than speaking now. He read every client's file before judging them. He no longer asked what someone did for a living before offering them respect. Because the man he once dismissed now lived in the back of his mind, not as punishment, but as possibility. The sun rose slow that morning. Golden light spilling across the marble floor of the bank's grand lobby. The building stood quiet before opening. Not empty, but still. Like it was waiting for something. Or someone. He was already inside. He stood beneath the skylight, hands behind his back, eyes scanning the space not with pride, but with memory. This was where it started. Not just the institution, the idea. That money, when wielded with principle, could protect more than assets. Could restore dignity. His reflection shimmered faintly in the polished floor. Faint but grounded. A man who owned more than anyone in the building, yet was remembered not for what he had, but for what he had given back. Upstairs, executives prepared for a quarterly meeting. Reports were aligned. Numbers were strong. But something else hovered in the margins. The quiet question none dared to print. How had the culture changed so drastically? And why did it feel more real than ever? They knew the answer. They just didn't want to say his name. Because to name him would be to acknowledge how far they drifted before he came back. Outside, customers began to line up. Some familiar. Some new. Some dressed in suits. Others in clothes stitched with second chances. They no longer feared being overlooked. The doors opened with grace now, not grudgingly, but gladly. Inside, behind the main desk, the staff had changed their rhythm. They spoke less like machines, more like people. Not because of a training video, but because they'd seen what it looked like when a man carried his name not like a sword, but like a seed. He walked slowly through the branch, stopping only once. At the original teller window, the very spot where, not long ago, he had been told he didn't belong. The woman at that station was new, young, nervous. She didn't recognize him, not fully, but something about the way he stood, calm, centered, untitled, made her sit straighter. He handed her a note, just a folded card. Inside, in quiet pen, "Don't measure people. Meet them." She kept it, tucked between the pages of her training manual. Later, that day, she offered a chair to a man in worn boots and helped him open his first account in a decade. No judgment, no hesitation, just presence. Across town, in a different building, a room full of industry leaders met to discuss innovation in finance. They debated algorithms, strategy, outreach. His name came up again. One of them said, "He never scaled." Another replied, "He didn't need to, because what he did couldn't be measured by charts." It was visible in the way people walked into a room without shrinking, in the way clients started speaking more freely, in the way the bank began to feel less like a fortress and more like a place that remembered who it was built for. He never returned to the spotlight. He didn't build a legacy brand. He didn't launch a foundation in his name. But in the smallest office of the quietest branch, a photo eventually appeared. No plaque, no inscription, just a grainy still, captured by an old security camera, of a man placing a card on a counter, his back straight, his coat plain, his presence unmistakable. The man who once walked in carrying a check and left carrying a broken system into the light.